I'm really honored and happy to give this talk to you this night. I just realized that perhaps for me it would be better to move close to the computer, if you don't mind. Because otherwise I cannot change the slides. Or I can try to install this one, maybe. Let me see if it works. If I'm lucky.
Where do we change it?
Yeah, it works. Okay, okay. Then I can try to stay. You see? This is the wrong way. No, I was looking for the bar. I have everything. Okay. So the idea is to talk about to generally give an introduction of the planning hulls development. For me, the history, I haven't lived most of the history of the planning hulls, but I have studied it, especially from the technical point of view, and I will try to introduce the general concept, and even more than the general concept, actually the nice boats and end results that have been achieved over time, up to arrive to today, and introducing you a new concept that we recently tested and was sponsored by UNR, that actually seems to have a very promising future. So I took this kind of graph from the famous paper of Savitsky and Gore, Reevaluation of Planning Hull Form, from the Journal of Hydronautics, where actually Savitsky gives a kind of historic review of the development of planning hulls, so starting from the end of the 1800s and going up to 1980s. And I just realized that Italy is missing from was missing from this chart. So this is another thing I wanted to tell you. The overview I'm giving to you this night about the development of planning hulls, it's far from being omnicomprehensive and complete. It's actually very partial and incomplete. And I will talk mostly about the developments that have been done in Italy to compensate for this kind of missing. As you see, turbine, yes, everything seems to go back to the early developments of high-speed boats, not planning boats yet, done in England, that were related to the largest development of propulsion and engine systems, steam engine system. And then the first motorboat, coastal motorboats, so-called. But at the same time in Italy, at the beginning of 1900, we had the first development of hydrofoil crafts by Crocco for Lanini, and they were collaborating with another famous industrialist and boat shipbuilder, that was Baglietto, Pietro Baglietto, and he actually developed one of the first so-called mass. It was again a torpedo boat that was actually used even before the First World War, to destroy some of the ships of the Austrian-Hungaric Empire in Trieste. And then they were used all over the period of the First towards the Second World War, when the Italian fleet had more than 220 mass torpedo boats in its fleet. And then from that point on, you see that between the First and the Second World War, actually, there was a cross-contamination between Italy and England in the development, and actually it was a kind of competition, or actually a collaboration sometimes. But then, after the Second World War, for some peace treaty and so on, Italy was actually forbidden to have its own fleet of torpedo boats, and we inherited the design of UK and US, and many of those boats were brought in our fleet. Then, after the 60s, there were some new design actually sprung out from the original design of boats, as I will show you in the next slide. This is again a typical example of the first, let's say, type of a planing hull. It was not really planing, but you see that it had already several steps, and it was developed in 1910 by Faubert, a French engineer, and some other smaller craft developed in US and in France. They were the first attempt to reach high speed with a planing hull in water. And these are the first two patents of planing hulls that were filed. The first one is in 1872 by Ramos, and then John Thornycroft in England developed the second one, which looks very similar. And those were the ages where the hydrodynamic force that could sustain a craft at high speed was discovered. And you see that the original shape used by Thornycroft and others in developing the motor torpedo boats were actually inspired, if not translated, I would say, from the first tests that were done in the US and in other parts of the world for the hydroplanes. Right? So these are tests made at NACA a little later, but the design of hydroplanes was started more or less at the same time where the first planing hulls were created. This is a famous Miranda hull designed by Sir John Thornycroft in England that had basically rounded forms, but with some particular spray strips and a step that could actually help to start the planing. And this boat actually could reach 35 knots with 120 horsepower, and it was displacing 1 ton. So it was a very good achievement for that age. It was one of the first. And this is a simple graph, actually not perfect, of that age that started to introduce to naval architects, which were used to sustain a boat by the Archimedes principles, that for the first time there could be another type of force, the hydrodynamic lift, that could be exploited if the shape of the hull was opportunely designed and the speed and the propulsion was powerful enough. Of course, the development of the hull went in pair with the development of the engines, smaller and high-power dense diesel engines first, and then the propellers also. So it was a very exciting period. Nowadays we have some more modern tools that explain us even further how the lift is actually created and what, from the fluid dynamic point of view, happens for a planing hull. I show you the results of a computational fluid dynamic simulation with a model that we have developed for a recent hull form of the US Coast Guard tested at Carderock. And you see that I can, the simulations give us the shape of the free surface. If I go back and forth, I can hide the free surface shapes, and you see that the calm water surface is actually impacting the hull at this location, which is called spray rod line, and then forms a thin layer of spray that overturns and bends aside and creates a very particular type of transverse flow on the hull. And that area is the area, here you see the same hull in the same perspective view, but this color now show you the pressure coefficient. So the pressure, red is high pressure transmitted by the fluid on the hull, and blue is atmospheric pressure. So you see that where the water first impacts the hull and overturns into the spray, in that area is the area where the high pressure region, the lift force, is created on the hull. And is it actually, this is the bottom view of the hull. I have presented two different things here. This the port side part of the hull shows the wetted in color, is colored by the wetted area is in red, and the blue part is part in air, while the starboard side shows instead, again, the pressure distribution. Red is high pressure, blue is atmospheric pressure, and colors in between is pressure force in between. But you see that the major portion of the lift that is created by the flow onto the hull is along this so-called spray route line. And the spray route line is well evidenced here by the vectors that indicate the direction of the flow. This is the spray area, so the flow that is diverted by this high pressure area onto the spray sheet that goes transversally, and the rest of the flow is actually flowing almost longitudinally onto the hull. So the major portion of the hull that contributes to create lift is the area around the stagnation pressure, the stagnation line. And if you may notice also some higher pressure area here. Here there is a so-called spray rail or flat of the chine. This is another spray rail. Actually, what impacts into the spray rail is just the thin layer, the thin sheet of spray that has a high speed. So when it's impacting on this flat of the chine, it is diverted downwards, and this diversion of the flow creates another high pressure just in this region. So you start to understand also one of the functions of these spray rails that are designed in several ways on planing crafts. Just to show you what kind of accuracy we can get, or indication we can get from running this kind of fluid dynamic simulations. This is the results we get in terms of resistance drag at various speed for this given hull. These are the result, the curve is the result of the experimental test in the towing tank. So we can get really very close. And this is a famous semi-empirical method to predict the resistance of planing craft developed by Sabisky. So nowadays we have the tools that allows us to really go deep into the explanation of how this lift is created and how the shape may influence the performance of the hull. And I believe this will make a big change. If it's not already making it, it will make a big change in the future for the design of this planing hulls. But going back to the past, the early 1900s was the time also of the development of the torpedoes. Okay, this is Robert Whitehead testing a torpedo in Fiume. Fiume is the other side of Trieste. It's now in Croatia, but at that time it was Italy. Fiume went back and forth between Italy, Yugoslavia, Austria first, several times. And that was the main driver that convinced different navies in Europe and the US to create these fast boats. Small boats that were not in the fleet before. They had to be fast, carry. In this case, this was one of the first boats ever designed and built, the Tournikov Vedette skimmer. It is a planing boat, as you see here. This is her planing on the water at high speed, and it was carrying mainly one torpedo to attack other ships in coastal waters. At the same time, this is Varazze. I'm very sentimental about this part of the history because my grandfather, one of my two grandfathers, come from Varazze. He was an industrialist in Varazze. He created all the gas piping plants and delivered the gas to all the town and surrounding towns. And he was a good friend with Pietro Baglietto, the grandchild of the first Pietro Baglietto, who actually was the founder of a famous boatyard in Italy, Baglietto, who has this typical seagull sign. That at that time was developing the first hydrofoil boats with the Crocco for Nannini, and had started to develop the first torpedo motorboat in already, this is the first yacht that was actually created for the Pope, Leone XIII, and then Giuseppina was the first big motor yacht built in 1906. It was 22 meters long, and for Italy it was really a big event. Baglietto created several series of torpedo motorboat. The first went out in the early 1915. You see some example. This is famous one, the MS 200 series. These are instead pleasure yachts created on the wake of the first torpedo motorboat. This is actually a close-up of them. Oh, at the same time, sorry, there was not only Baglietto, of course, in Italy. This is a series of torpedo motorboats created in Venice from another boatyard. This is in Livorno from Fratelli Orlando. And you see here the shape, which is actually clearly a planning hull shape, very flat dead rise. Flat dead rise with concave sections, almost zero dead rise at stern, at the transom. The idea at that time was, because the power was limited, and more than the power, the thrust from the propeller was limited, because the propeller design was still very early in the science of designing propeller. So the idea was to create as much lift as possible, so that the sections had to be as flat as possible, and the boats were operating mainly in very sheltered water, sometimes in the harbors, to attack other ships. So this is the famous 400 class of torpedo motorboats. MAS stands for Motoscafo Antisommergibile, so motorboat anti-som, and it has a planning hull with a step, with a generous step actually, and you see that the shape was, in my opinion, mainly inspired by the hydroplane hulls that were studied and developed in those years. And it could reach 43 knots, being 16 meters long. I don't have the idea of the displacement, but you see that actually also from the side it was built with the finishing of a yacht more than a military boat, if you like. Right? And in fact, the famous poet Gabriele D'Annunzio, that was living in that region, actually had a yacht with the same kind of hull. And actually, MAS acronym was, he rebirthed the acronym in Latin, said memento audere sempre. That means remember to always there. Gabriele D'Annunzio was a poet of the early Italian Republic, so it was a very patriotic kind of poetry. This was another example, 500 series of Baglietto torpedo boats with two steps this time, 48 knots with 1100 horsepower, 18 meter long, 4 meter wide. They were very slender, right? And very nice boat actually, and nothing in common, or completely separate design from what was happening. From what was happening in England. So, because we talked about steps, what is a step and what can actually create on a planning hull? I intermediate these historical notes with some more technical but short technical notes. I believe my group was the first to use computational fluid dynamics to study the, yes, we were the first to publish a study of this kind, to study the effect of steps and reproduce the fluid dynamics effect correctly. So instead of having all wetted area under your hull, to create a lift that is created basically around this narrow line, which is the spray root line, you can eliminate part of the wetted area under your hull and recreate a new high pressure area behind the step by creating a step. So this has two effects. Duplicate the lift because you have a first high pressure line and a second one, and you can play on the height of the step and the positioning of the step to perfectly position this high pressure area where they should be, which is not so simple if you just have to play with one. And then the second is that you get rid of a fraction of the pressure or the friction drag on your hull, because this portion of the hull remains unwetted because it is ventilated by the air. And at that time, actually, I don't have a drawing, but sometimes there were venting pipes in these ships that were bringing the air. Some other times the air was naturally convected from outside. So I show you as a result of a simulation that we published in 2010, and these are the model tests. It's a picture from below the hull, so you see the wetted area here, destination root line, the step, which is a forward back step, and then the ventilated area behind the step, which we reproduce correctly by our simulation, which can capture exactly the position of the spray root line, the wetted area, and the rest of the wetted portion or semi-ventilated portion in the stern. And this, again, was a kind of a first validation that convinced many designers to go on using this kind of sophisticated fluid dynamic tools to design also planing hulls. The introduction of more scientific concepts, except from few famous examples, Don is one of them. The design of a planing craft is sometimes still more of an art than an engineering. And there are few very good engineers and many, let's say, practitioners or artists. This is another example that we tested for our. This is one of the motor torpedo boat. We found the original shape and the test made in 1912 in a towing tank. The first towing tank built in Italy. It was in La Spezia. Now it's not there anymore. It was dismantled. We found those tests in the archives and reproduced the hull and ran the simulation. You see, this is a relatively low firm number when the hull is not perfectly planing. You see that the step, though, creates a partial ventilation in the afterbody, and then the flow reattaches and flows on the rest. If we increase the speed, the ventilation progresses towards the stern, and this part only is wetted in the stern. And then we reach a speed, which is a very high speed. You see here, the only portion that is wetted is the portion in front of the step. So in this condition, the boat, in perfectly ideal conditions, let's say, the boat is flying, literally flying in equilibrium with the pressure area that is created in this area, and the rest of the hull is flying in the air. Because, and this is, I can show you the 3D picture, this is a confirmation that somehow the technique to design, to position well the step, and to balance the center of gravity of the hull with respect to the shape of the hull was pretty good. Already at that age, 19 and 15. This again is the resistance coming from the towing tank test, the curve, and the predictions made by our fluid dynamic code, which is within 3% of error from the test results, again confirming that these tools are mature now to be used. I want to go on with the history of Baglietto development, because I think met about Baglietto. I grew up, most of my summers were spent in Varazze, and Baglietto shipyard was always there. And beautiful boats were coming out of it. These are the first series of yachts, personal yachts that were created with the idea to be accessible to the larger public, not only to the very rich guys, but larger public. And they had a very, very wide diffusion in Italy, all over the world. It was the island, so-called island series of yachts, Elba, Ischia, Capri, Mark. They were all derived from the motor torpedo boat. And these were, instead, was a later patrol boat for the Coast Guard developed by Baglietto, and Baglietto actually went on from the Second World War until nowadays. These are larger yachts created then after the 60s from Baglietto, and you see that they still share the same type of hull, opportunely modified for the higher weight and with a larger size, but the shape remains the same of those motor torpedo boats, a little bit deeper as a V, until we arrived to Chateau. Chateau was one of the larger and faster motor yachts built in the 80s. And this has instead a very different type of hull. It's more of the deep V type, which we'll talk about. Just a short mention into the UK and the American type of torpedo motorboats, of course, have been very important and widely spread around the world. The type of shape of this is the transom shape is very similar to what I showed you before from Baglietto, and they all derived, again, in my opinion, from the hydroplanes and hulls. So to speak about shapes, this is taken again by the paper from Sovietsky, and he compares a typical hard chine hull, which is typical for planning boats, and this is a hull taken from Series 62 of Blount and Clement, versus a typical fast round bilge hull form. The round bilge hull form cannot enter in the planning regime if not adequately modified with some kind of spray strip, which is able to divert the flow transversally and downward, and so to create a higher pressure region under the hull, while the hard chine hull is ideal to create this kind of separation of the flow and receive a higher dynamic pressure to support the hull at high speed. Over the years, many different shapes from the initial ones that I would say were similar to this, with actually a slimmer transom, less breadth transom. There was a long research of different kind of shapes, convex, concave, convex, biconvex or bell-shaped, slightly convex with one spray rail or two chines here, as it was suggested by Savitsky. This is, for instance, the shape of PT-8 boats, famous American patrol boats, and this is a reverse V version. But what changed from the period of the two World Wars up to the 60s was a very strong research in finding the effect of the shapes of this kind on the performance. After the 60s, a new type of hull form came out, which is called the so-called deep V, and I have to click on the computer, otherwise I don't go forward. The so-called deep V. It changed completely. I cite an article of Campora, Bruno, is a famous offshore racing pilot and designer of offshore boat, and he said that after the 56, after the famous first Miami-Nassau race, there was a strong development in designing high-performance planing hulls for offshore applications. So for the first time from coastal areas we go also offshore, so we have to withstand the action of relatively high sea state. And this is, in his opinion, the reason why deep V kind of hull forms were created. From a theoretical point of view, having a deep V to create a high pressure force, lift force is not a very efficient way of creating. It's actually less efficient than flatter type of hull forms. But it has a property. It gives a better seakeeping, less motion and acceleration in waves. So the breakthrough that was done in the design of high-speed racing planing hulls was the DP. And I don't want to talk about who was the inventor or what else. The first application is due to Raymond Hans, a famous designer, but also Renato Levi, and again I go back to Italy somehow. At that time was active, very active, and there was a competition between the two. And I will show you. This is the famous Mobby, 1958, DP hull of Ray Hunt. This is Surfery, 1965, DP hull of Sonny Levy. This is Cigarette, another DP hull of Don Aronoff, another famous American designer of racing hull forms. And I show you the differences as explained in the book of Sonny Levy, which in my opinion is one of the genius of planing hull design, really a genius. He died actually 6-8 months ago, so it's also a kind of gentle tribute to his work. You see two different hull forms of Sonny Levy, Speranzella second here, and Surfery in the version. This was the first motorboat of Giovanni Agnelli, the former owner of Fiat. He was rich Italian. And if you compare the two with the Ray Hunt Moppy, you see that Ray Hunt has much more straight sections, while the design of Sonny Levy have always a certain convex shape that remains also at the transom. Right? And this, in his opinion, together with the design of the spray rails, gave better qualities from both the calm water performance but also seakeeping. And if you compare these shapes, called DV shapes, with the shapes that were used at that time, the same time, for different planing yachts, they look completely different. The address, this angle of a DV hull is higher, not only at midship, but is maintained up to the transom. The breadth is also large at the transom, while typically it was decreasing at the transom. And this was a big factor that permitted to this hull. I have some other example of very nice. I wanted to show some kind of beautiful design that were created in this sector. This is the famous Dart boat, again designed by Sonny Levy, and you see there is a step here, separation of the flow, and the boat was meant to operate with at a very high speed, with a stagnation root line here, pressure line here, and another reattachment, or even no reattachment at all in the stern part, because the propeller oriented with a certain angle was giving the necessary lift force in the stern to equilibrate also the rotation. And this is the boat flying, literally flying on the water. Another famous design of Sonny Levy that really was the difference between Sonny Levy and other designers of those times is that he was able to create many different concepts, and many of them were successful. Many other designers were stuck with this deep V hull form, conventional mono hull, and they stayed there, perfectionating it, but they stayed. This is the famous three-point reverse tricycle So it was a trimaran, if you like, with the two hulls in the bow and a single hull in the stern and in the center line. And it was very successful again and very stable also. The problem of those ages was to achieve the hull stability, dynamic stability. This was really good, both in waves and in another famous invention of Sonny Levy was the surface piercing propeller drive. He invented the surface piercing propellers, not only himself, but he invented this drive. And it was one of the first actually designing and building the drive, which is still nowadays used in many high-speed motor yachts. It has an integrated rudder, which has a kind of so the function of this kind of tunnel here is to avoid that the spray coming up from the surface piercing propeller goes up in the air, and at the same time it acts as a rudder that you normally have to place in a different position. And sometimes it was also steerable, so you could actually use it as a rudder. Okay, so these were, and I didn't read what Bruno Campora said, but for Bruno Campora, that is a famous designer of offshore racing craft and high-speed motor yachts. This was the major breakthrough. It happened in the 60s and 70s that changed completely the picture. And many of the boats that nowadays we see at sea still have this kind of hull forms, DP hull form, because it's good to keep low the motion and acceleration in waves. This is I have a series of slides now, so where we are now. So I close the historic part with this. If you bear with me still for a moment, I show you if I click on this. Perhaps one of the coolest design that I found to cite about nowadays applications. This is a very fast boat, 65 plus knots, very slender, and probably capable also of being submerged to some distance. Apart from the vertical bow, the reverse bow, if you like, that actually was there also in the motor torpedo in 1915. The hull is a different hull to the double step. So you see that, yes, the boat looks very modern, but it hasn't changed a lot. There is a surface piercing drive in the stern. And the hull, I don't show you the section because I couldn't find them. But the sections are the same that Ray Hunt or Sonny Levy were designing for their boat. Some other examples. These are famous Special Operation Forces craft. This is again in line with the previous boat that we saw. It can be submerged. I took all this material from the internet, so it's all publicly releasable. And these are, so there are manned boats, but also unmanned. This is a tribute to Dr. Robert Brizzolara from ONR, who is listening in the audience. These were two boats actually developed under these programs, which we also published recently in the recent handbook of ocean engineering. This is an unmanned sea surface vehicle for Hydrofoils, but it's a planing hull when it's not told you, of course. And this is a hydrofoil craft, actually. But both, again, are using the same kind of hulls that were developed by Baglietto and others in the 1930s, and by Ray Hunt and others in the 60s. We go now in the yacht, just to show a picture of dream boats that I believe every one of us would like to have. This is a very nice one, which I dream of having. Actually, it can actually sail at more than 65 knots with a certain amount of power. If you can read here, so the total power is written here, 12,000 kilowatts. It has 3 gas turbines These are the inlets of the gas turbines. It is designed by Wally Power. The hull is designed by Wally Power and then Lazzarini, Pickering, the architects. The boatyard is in Monte Carlo, so not Italy, but very close by. And many Italian students of mine from Genoa go and work there, actually. So this was one of a kind, and then they decided it was perhaps too expensive for many human beings. This is another nice yacht, Pershing 108. It is again a fast yacht. I just picked some of the yachts I used to see in Genova, where I live, or in the Ligurian Riviera or French Riviera, Saint-Tropez, Caine. And you see again surface piercing propeller, three propellers this time. You can understand again the power. Each engine has 2,600 horsepower. So 3 times it goes up to 78 horsepower. It can reach 42 knots. It is 33 meters long and 25 meters wide. Sorry, and 6 meters wide. Another dream boat, Via 100, again designed and built in Italy. It can reach more than 6 knots, more than 45 knots. AB Yachts, another boat designed by Arnaboldi, famous Italian architect, can reach again, the speed is 53 knots, 36 meters long. You see, but what I wanted you to note is this. The shape of the hull is still a deep V hull. Right? Nothing has changed from the time of the 60s, basically, from Sonlevi and Ray Hunt or I don't know. So a lot of designers went in the wake of those racing offshore yachts, and of course I needed to cite one of the fastest boats ever, and I'm really pleased that Don is here tonight. It's not only one of the fastest, but it is one of the most efficient. This is one, and in fact, correct me, Master, if I'm wrong, but it doesn't have a pure DP hull front, right? It's a kind of personalized version, revised version based on your long time experience.
It's very personalized.
Yes. I joined Fincantieri when the Destriero was already built, and so I couldn't share the exciting times Don had in Fincantieri. This is the part of the bottom and keel that was laid down in the shipyards where I was used to go, and the bow section and the midship section brought it together in the shipyard. He won the Blue Ribbon trophy sailing at an average speed you remember well.
Well, crossing the Atlantic, it averaged a touch over 53 knots.
Yeah. Wow. But the maximum speed was?
When it arrived in England, it was 60 knots, but it's.
Yes.
I've been on board at 66 knots.
Yes. Because the problem there for such a long distance, I reviewed the drawings. We had the drawings. And the most of the boat was there just to carry fuel. Right? And no, it's true. And the weight, you remember well again, the change of weight between the start and the end was, I don't know, but at least 5%.
It was, I believe, 550 tons of fuel was burned in the Atlantic crossing.
So this gives
metric tons, how's that? Little tons.
Little tons. This gives you an idea on how the hull had to be actually optimized, because you cannot just design this hull for the top speed, which is reached at the low fuel level, but it has to be designed for having the best efficiency in the whole range of displacement, which was very, very, very high. This is again a view to water jet, free water jet propulsion, and they were also, I believe, the first large water jets.
These were the largest steering and reversing water jets
jet.
that Kamiwa had ever built. They were.
Then when I joined Fincantieri,
Inlet diameter was 1.25, a meter and a quarter, the inlet diameter of each water jet.
so when I joined Fincantieri, we were designing fast ferries instead, which again had the record as the largest water jet ever built. At the time, it was the 180 series and 220 series of Cameva, which were the largest. After the Destino were the largest. So Cameva with Fincantieri had actually a fruitful collaboration in trying to install and optimize the water jet for high-speed cars. Then after the master, I would like to bring back Italy. And I have to cite a friend of mine, Fabio Buzzi. He is, again, in my point of view, another important, very important person in the design of high-speed craft of this age. This is a boat that he designed and won recently the Bermuda Challenge. It is again, if you like, a deep V hull form, perfectionated by Fabio with one or two steps, I don't remember. Here you have his design surface piercing propeller system, which is different from Levi system. It has rudder behind the propeller. And these are other examples. This is a nice, again, a nice design. It is a deep V hull with a special design of the spray rails, two steps, the surface piercing drives here. But it also has these inflatable, it's not a fan there. It's not used to increase the displacement. It's there because he did some tests and he could find that it actually has an effect in reducing the acceleration in heavy systems. So it helps with respect to a hard hull to dampen the motion by, of course, fluid structure interaction effects. And another interesting topic is this kind of detail of the spray rail, which is again useful in large pitch motion to dampen the motion. These are some other noticeable newer designs which bring us in the topic of the design of the spray rail. This is not even a spray rail, it's a modified version of spray rail which creates kind of tunnel. And again, we were among the first to use computational fluid dynamics to study the effect of spray rails on a planing hull. And we showed this, which is again very useful information for a designer. I guess I'm sure that Don will appreciate. If you, from the model test in a towing tank, you cannot have this kind of information. There is no way you can have it. There is no way you can have the distribution of the pressure, high pressure, under your hull, which is directly related with the lift and pitching moment that the planing hull receives at high speed. And this is a hull without spray rails. This is a hull with the 3/4 with the Pershing spray rails. And you see that the pressure, instead of being kind of uniform along the stagnation route line, it is concentrated and actually increased around the location of the spray rails. And just behind the flow has this transversal component in this area. So the flow is actually jumping from one spray rail, ventilating portion of the hull behind the step, which is created with the spray rail, then reattaching, ventilating, reattaching, separating, reattaching. So by this successive reattachment, you create high pressure region, and we really increase the pressure in that area. So you can use actually the spray rail, if you make a, let's say, are not a very good designer, you make a mistake and you don't get the exact lift or location of the center of pressure where you would like it to be. You can actually modify the hull with the Portion arrangement of spray rails to somehow recover part of the lift. You can make miracles, but another important effect that we also described in the early paper is the effect of the water jet inlets. So water jet inlets suck a considerable flow rate of water, and that is stolen by the flow that would flow normally on the hull, and because you are actually stealing this flow rate of flow mass of water, you modify, but considerably depending on the relative power of your water jets, you modify considerably the pressure distribution on your hull. You see here the original hull without water jet inlets and the one with water jet inlets. It modifies the pressure in a way that changes the lift, the pitch, the trim angle, and in turn the change of trim angle can change also the pressure distribution around the main portion of the hull. If you notice, there are differences between this and the other hull, because the trim angle due to the water jet action actually changes of about 1 degree. And this was a problem for this particular shipyard that we consulted, because they were expecting this kind of similar kind of resistance at this speed, and instead they had this. And they lost kind of 5 knots of speed because of that. So what we did, what was possible to do, because the boat was already built, usually they always come after, never before. The only possibility was to modify the arrangement of the spray rails, and you see the original arrangement didn't make a lot of sense actually, because if you mentally imagine how the flow separates here and may reattach after, it may reattach onto this second spray rail, but it won't be able to reattach again on the flat of the chine. It's too close. So we modified it, eliminating this secondary flat of chine and inclining downward. And we recover, if you look at the pressure here, especially here, we recover a part of lift. So if you remember before, we were 4.89 and we went down to 4 degrees and 3 points. And we reduced a little bit the drag. So this is again to tell you what computational fluid dynamics, how can this tool, these models that we created help the design. And I finish, I hope you are not sleeping yet. I finish saying a few words about the future, a possible future, because I mentioned a kind of evolution of the species of planing hulls. Actually, in the last period, there hasn't been a lot of evolution from the 70s, let's say 80s, until now. So let's see which kind of needs or drivers can trigger this, the next step in the evolution. We still need lower power, or look for lower power at high speeds in a realistic sea state, not just in calm water. We want to ensure dynamic stability because we are increasing speeds. We want a better sea keeping, low motion and acceleration in waves, and controllability, maneuverability at speeds. Military application with crew actually would like all of them. Military autonomous craft actually should focus just on the first and fourth requirements, while recreational, perhaps for recreational boat, the low power is not important. The owner is going to use the yacht in the end, probably 3-4 weeks a year, so who cares if you spend 1.5 or just 1 on fuel. Right. So to try to address this kind of drivers, new drivers, and try to innovate, bring something new, or try to improve the already good performance of DPA hull forms, we were basically
we relied on an early work of Clement, which in my opinion has been neglected for too long. And nobody has, I don't know if nobody, but nobody has come up with a continuation of that idea that Clement introduced back in the 60s. Clement was saying, and you can look at this graph very well. So again, the wetted portion is in red, the high pressure area is in red in this part. This is just wet or air, water or air on the hull. So you need this high pressure area to sustain your boat, but because you need this part, basically, this triangle, you also maintain the rest of the hull, which has very low pressure. It's almost atmospheric pressure here, which creates basically friction, a lot of friction, no lift force, and creates drag substantially, just because you want this high pressure area in front. This is not very clever. Right? But actually, Clement said this. He analyzed the results of many different planing hull forms at those times, and this is a volumetric number. I converted the speed scale he was giving for a certain boat size. Never mind the boat size, more or less this graph is remaining the same. So he had noticed that in the first early planning, the wetted area, this is the wetted area of the hull, reduces rapidly. When a boat plans, it comes out of the water, less wetted area there is the result. But if you just focus on the friction drag with the speed increases by the square of the speed. So if you ideally would like to maintain the same kind of drag you have at low speed, also at high speed, this area, wetted area, should decrease with the square of the speed, which is not, because it's at least linear here. But at least it's decreasing. Above a certain speed, you noticed, there is a limitation. The wetted area doesn't, it is a physical limitation, because for a hull without steps, the wetted area cannot decrease further because of the location of this stagnation area, the high pressure area. It cannot, this stagnation line cannot go back and back because the location of the center of gravity where the weight is applied. In this case, it will be around here approximately. And if I move the high pressure area after it, I don't achieve the equilibrium anymore. This line has to stay around the location of the center of gravity, to achieve the equilibrium. So naturally, this cannot continue to go backwards, and the wetted area cannot decrease anymore. The only way you have to decrease this wetted area, and I don't go farther on this graph. The only way you have to decrease this wetted area is to create a step. Okay, it's nothing new because it was implemented in 1915, right? In the torpedo boats. But what is new in our work, supported by ONR, is that Clement applied this kind of concept to very low dead rise planing hulls, shallow dead rise, flat planing hulls. Not useful for seagoing vessels actually, because we understood from the UV hull form that the only way to have good keeping qualities is to maintain this dead rise high. So what we did is to try to, let's say, genetically modify the species created, the new species created by Clement, and adapt it to high dead rise planing hulls. But we maintain his concept opportunely revised. So one of his concepts, I go faster because I want to close. I will close in 10 minutes. One of his concepts is the high pressure area. If you the planning, one of his fundamental concept was to treat planing hull forms as aerodynamic lifting surfaces. And again, this is quite a breakthrough because naval architects are used to think about length over beam ratio, length over volume 1/3, slenderness ratio, beam over draft. Okay, all things that are good for displacement hull forms, also good in some extent for planing hull forms. In fact, some of these coefficients go out in case of planing hull form and lose meaning. But it is instead sure, and it was clear to Clement, not so clear to many others that came after him, that there is a perfect similitude between a lifting surface that is studied by aerodynamic engineers and a planing hull, or the bottom of a planing hull. And this first similitude allows us to say that a high aspect ratio lifting surface is more efficient than a low aspect ratio lifting surface. And this is again taken by a paper from Clement and Pope. And again, so when you create a step and you break the wetted area of your planing surface, and you pass from a situation like this to a situation like this, not only you decrease the friction drag, but you increase also the efficiency in producing the lift force. Okay, so this is a Series 62 model, and this was the aspect ratio that Clement could achieve with his tiny plane. There is another concept introduced by Clement that we studied and we understood well, that if you can create a step in various ways. These are lifting surfaces of same area and same aspect ratio, but the line of the step is in this case purely transversal, in this case is bent forward, in this case is swept back. He says that the swept back or up to sweep angle of the step is the most efficient. And actually this is controversial. There were debates among Savitsky and him that this was not true or not. I believe in this, and I tell you that there were some tests made by Savitsky and Kurbel that demonstrated that this kind of swept back surface is not more efficient than this, but I think they are skewed by a particular type of design that they chosen to compare the two lifting surfaces. Okay, I go fast, I don't want to show this. We actually did an exercise and I showed it for a real hull form that was designed without swept back step with the reattachment of the flow without camber. We gained 19% of that. So the fact that Clement, Savitsky and Kurbel were discussing, and the fact that probably they didn't find the agreement with Clement was this: they tested flat, so dead rise planing surfaces, but with just a flat shape. If you introduce camber on a planing surface, so introduce a longitudinal curvature, then you increase the efficiency considerably. And again, this is our original work made by Clement with a lot of tests in towing tank and cargo. And here you compare the lift over drag, so the efficiency in creating lift by a flat planing surfaces or a camber planing surface. And you see that a meaningful lift coefficient, you increase the efficiency of, I don't say 2 times, but almost. Okay, so the other concept is if you introduce some longitudinal camber to the planing surface, which is not used in deep V planing hull at all, this may bring some more efficiency. So we took that concept. This is our cambered planing surface. The step is swept back, and then we have, of course, the flow is. Let me see. I don't speak about this. There is no time. We have developed a special code which is based on lifting surface. So the same aerodynamic method that aeronautical engineers use to design the wings, we use to design the best camber distribution on the planing surface. And then we have a special type of hydrofoils in the stern, because you have to here. So Imagine that the water touches the hull only in this small and high aspect ratio lifting surface here, because the stagnation line is meant to be somehow around this line. Then all the rest of the hull is flying in here, is not touched by the water, and you need some supporting force at the stern. We achieve that by special arrangement of a special type of hydrofoil. This again distinguishes us from the early work of Clement. Clement tested conventional hydrofoils. We have, again, in another project sponsored by ONR, we have developed a special type of hydrofoil which is robust, or is performing predictably with the ventilation and cavitation that occurs at high speeds. Any type of conventional hydrofoil, surface piercing hydrofoil, will have a very difficult to predict and severe jumps on lift force due to ventilation and cavitation above a speed of about 50 knots, depending on the design of the hydrofoil. These boats are meant to operate above 60 knots or more. So you need to completely change the type of hydrofoil section, and we created with ONR a new type of section which is also patented actually, that is ensuring good efficiency both in the fully wet, when there is no ventilation, and in the ventilation region. And we studied this kind of stuff. This is the now I show you the final configuration of the hull. There is a problem also of dynamic stability, but I don't want to go so deep in the detail. And the final configuration of the hydrofoil that gave us good results, both in terms of efficiency and dynamic stability, is this shape as opposed to that shape. We tested different kind of cambered planing surfaces on our hull, and these are the prediction that we did with our numerical models. You may notice one thing. You remember for a conventional planing hull, the impact of the water on the hull was creating a high pressure line, right, where the water was impacting along the stagnation line. Now you may notice another larger, actually, high pressure area that is created after the impact of the water due to the camber. Okay, the camber, the curvature that we have introduced on the hull in that area, especially, creates this high pressure region. And it is the only way you can support the total weight of the boat with such a small wetted area. Right. Not only you can support the weight, that's steps here, but you can create lift efficiently, much more efficiently than longer lifting surfaces with a low aspect ratio. This aspect ratio is very, if you imagine this as an airplane wing, it is actually very similar. It's shorter in terms of span, but it's not so different from an airplane wing, and we know that airplanes don't have a large chord and short span, but they have large span and short chords, right? These are some simulations. We can predict also the ventilation on the back surface of the hydrofoils. And this is finally the model that was tested in a towing tank, large towing tank at the Naval Academy, where we had an excellent assistance from the engineers and technicians there. And if I can start the video that shows how the boats behave at the design speed. What is released now, and it achieves the stable equilibrium. And all this portion is ventilated. This is the sky. I should have a picture. So here there is the spray that is ejected from the bottom of the hull. This only portion of the hull of the chine is wetted. Actually, yes. This rest of the afterbody is in air. It is fully ventilated from the outside, and at the stern there is the hydrofoil. The close-up picture. This is the gap. An interesting underwater picture. You see the stagnation of the flow. The stagnation line of the flow is around here, where actually the leading edge of our cambered portion of the bottom is placed. And this, for the engineers at the Naval Academy, was a kind of real surprise, because to be able to predict so accurately by numerical methods where the stagnation line will be on this particular hull form is not an easy task. So it has to be coincident with the leading edge of the cambered portion of the hull. Here is the step. This bubbly flow means that there is a free surface, so the rest of the hull is not touched by the water, and here you don't see them very well, but you see them here from the simulation. There is the surface piece in hydrofoil that touches the water. Volumetric flow number is 5.5. For a boat of 60 feet, it would correspond probably to 60 plus knots. And here I want to compare the wetted portion and the pressure distribution of this concept against the original hull. We actually left the same bow, modified this area, modified the stern, the afterbody, and introduced the hydrofoil, but these two hulls are comparable in terms of displacement, length, beam. And you see, I hope, after my presentation, you can appreciate the difference on wetted area and pressure distribution, which we achieve in the two different cases. This is the results in terms of drag. This is volumetric flow number. This is resistance over displacement. These are the experimental points. We draw a curve along them, and these are our numerical predictions, actually. You can notice this is the curve of the original hull form, US Coast Guard hull form. This is our resistance curves versus speed. At the design speed, which was flow number 5.5, we get 31% less drag than the original hull form, which is a big number for naval architect. It is in model scale, so it will be something less in full scale, but it is a big number still. 30% drag reduction is a kind of dream for any naval architect in the realms. So this brings me to the conclusion. Planing hulls development in the last century have been improved. Yes, the development has been kind of evolution by natural selection has happened, and it was triggered. The mutation was triggered by accidental events, I would say. The wars first, the racing competition then, and they brought good mutation from an evolutionary point of view, and they introduced a different concept. But in the last 30 years, in my opinion, nothing has really dramatically changed the picture of the hull. With this short talk, I tried to explain the main particulars of a new kind of species that actually was created on the early thoughts of Eugene Clement, and in my opinion is a promising concept because it combines the seakeeping and the properties of the free hull form with low drag properties of a stepped hull form and of a real efficient stepped hull form, because the free stepped hull form will exist but are not so efficient as this concept can be. And I want to thank ONR, Dr. Robert Brizzolara, for the support of the research, and also the excellent support we had from Dr. Caroline Chach first and Michael Rabitor later on, our professor actually are both of the US Naval Academy, and the engineer Bill Beaver that actually performed an excellent series of tests. I never had so much pleasure in doing that, and I made a lot of towing tank tests in my professional life. I was impressed really by the skills they have. And I'm open for any questions. Thank you.
Skills at the Naval Academy.
Yes.
I have a question, Steph.
Yes.
Two questions. Did you do any pressure survey on the swept back planing surface on that model?
No,
I
I would
correlate with the pressure coefficient.
Yeah, that is a very good question, and I would very much like. The problem is, yes, pressure measurements are tricky, especially on planning hulls.
Okay. And
They may be influenced by very small detail in the manufacture of the hull, can change the hull pressure. These are really tricky. And the original, I can tell you because I compared the lifting surface code that I created, the famous Chambliss Boyd measurement of pressure on the hydro planing surface. Many points are completely off, and they are clearly wrong.
okay. The other is that the lift coefficient that you had for a plot for L over D was the B for the beam, or how are you?
Yes, it's non-dimensionalized.
area?
It's non-dimensionalized with the beam.
So just the beam, just a
Yes,
a single length.
I'm sure that is the beam.
Okay.
I can go back and yeah. Is it written? No, because I okay. Yeah,
It
sorry.
was a different plot,
It's-
but anyway.
No, it's not. It's not this. No, the lift wheel. It was a different. Yeah, okay, but it was the
But
beam.
it was
for
the
sure.
beam, okay, just so it was
the only
a
parameter.
single linear, okay, number. Okay, thanks.
How did you get the wonderful pressure distributions that you got when they're so difficult to get?
Yes, that is, and this is the same question the engineers at the
Computers,
Naval
that's
Academy gave me because they were impressed. And actually, I tell you, we ran some 5 or 6 iteration of the fluid dynamic code before to find the right positioning of this. Because if you imagine this camber portion can travel back and forth and can open the angle. So these are the two main parameters, if you like. And in addition to that, there is the equilibrium of the house, no? Because for each longitudinal position and sweep angle, you have to find the running equilibrium of the boat. So to converge on the final design is not an easy task.
But that's a measured result.
No, this is numerically predicted by the numerical model, but this picture is what confirms the prediction, because if the stagnation line corresponds with the one that is predicted here, and the running equilibrium also means that we got it.
Have you got any thought to how to propel this thing? For example, water jets, you've got air traveling behind,
No.
or
No.
propellers, you've got the possibility of ventilation behind. So
Somehow we are in the same situation of high-speed racing offshore boats. So the most natural propulsion system is the surface piercing drive. So positioned somewhere even below the bottom of the after body, or integrated in the same design of the hydrofoils. Then there may be other options. There may be, as Clement actually suggested in one of his papers, there may be an option with podded drives and submerged propeller, but super heavy, of course. It's not this big. But the podded drive placed again somewhere in this area, or also placed at stern is complicated because there is the interference between the hydrofoil and the podded drive. And even if the podded drive is in front of the hydrofoil, we must consider the interference. I didn't go in detail. There is a lot of interaction between the free surface that detaches here and the outer hydrofoils, of course. It's really not easy to design this kind of outcome.
Professor, have any tests been done in a seaway, simulated
Yes.
seaway, and what are your
Yes.
expectations of
Yes, I
performance?
showed here. We did a completely new series of tests where we started from kind of notional Mark V type of hull, because the real hull is not open. So we modified that one, and we tested that one both in calm water and in waves. We have the results of the motion and acceleration measured in waves, in regular and irregular waves, which are good, are not impressive, and comparing them with the normal trends are actually look better. We cannot compare one-to-one the acceleration we measure with the acceleration of the original notional hull because the Naval Academy didn't test the notional hull, the original hull, in the exact same conditions. So I'm hoping in a future time to convince the Naval Academy of testing the original hull from the same conditions, so we can really compare one-to-one. But the results are promising.
What I'm getting at is there any reason to believe that this new design is so highly refined that it'll lose its robustness in the practical seaway?
What I can tell you is this. There will be above a certain sea state, as all the stepped hull form, with the wetting and unwetting of the afterbody will increase the added resistance in waves. But if you don't reach the limit, and we must actually quantify that limit very well, if you don't reach that limit, the damping, the extra damping that you get by the hydrofoil and also by the concentrated high pressure area under the bottom is completely different from the damping you can get from a conventional plant. So the concentrated pressure at the hydrofoil and in this region will create a considerable extra damping that will dampen for sure heat but also pitch. Then, when you start wetting the bottom, that depends also very much on the shape of the afterbody. So we tested actually two different shapes, one with this model and another completely different one with the second model. And I can tell you the second model is already better. So if you design well the afterbody shape, again, you can reduce this added resistance.
I'm curious, did you compare the calculations in the model and ship scale?
That's a good question. No, we never done full-scale computation. We always, the design we prepared is for model scale. Yes, it's a good question because it's the way you scale even the results of the towing tank to full scale is not trivial. It's not as easy as for a conventional planing hull because there is the ventilation of the hydrofoil here, and there is the very short core, the Reynolds number under the hull there. So to scale the results to full scale is not easy. You have to separate the two effects. No, from computational hydrodynamics, you have the resistance, the forces separated. It's easy. Calculation. The tricky part is the towing tank results. If you just do towing tank tests, then to scale the results full scale is not trivial. I would rely perhaps more on numerical computation for full scale than try to extrapolate.
Just an old comment. The original Clement dynaplane concept with the shallow hull and I'll call it the plum type tail. Actually, there was about a 30-foot boat built and there were sea trials conducted on that, but it's not this concept in terms of the stern support.
Yeah, and also the V angle because it was very shallow the
Right.
V angle. And I spoke with some person that actually followed those tests in full scale, and they told me that it was suffering heavily in the waves. But okay, we know that if you design shallow hull form, you cannot go in waves.
I think on that note, we ought to end. We actually have
Yes.
gone almost to 10 after.
Yes, thank you. Sorry.
We greatly appreciate you.
But,
didn't tell you before you accepted that one of the obligations that you acquire by agreeing to speak is that when you leave, you take a mug with you of a sort. We have thousands and we keep trying to do it.
Thank you.
There's IHS on one side, SD5 on the other. We don't care how many hundreds you have already, but this is better than all the rest.
Yeah, we hope to get Professor Brizzolara's presentation posted on the IHS website, and also we're going to sort out the details and edit the video. Make that available. You know what, again, thanks to everybody for coming out. Great presentation.